I never thought I would find myself in the situation I'm in now. You always hear about the moment when everything changes, the sudden revelation that rocks your world and makes you question everything you've ever known. But for me, it wasn't some dramatic confrontation, some shocking phone call, or a text message that popped up at just the wrong time. No, it was an accident. A moment of complete and utter bad luck that forced me to face a truth I wasn't ready for. One that would forever alter the course of my life. My name is Greg, and I've been married to Sarah for 10 years. Our relationship hasn't been perfect, but like most couples, we had our rhythm. Life had gotten predictable, comfortable even. There were times I felt like I was taking her for granted, just going through the motions of daily life. Work, errands, keeping up with bills, making sure the house was running smoothly. But I loved Sarah. I thought she loved me too. At least, that's what I told myself. In fact, I'd been planning a little getaway for just the two of us. A surprise to remind us of the spark we once had. I wanted to reignite something, to bring us back to where we were when we first met. That was the plan anyway. The signs had been there if I'd only paid attention. I started to notice small changes in Sarah's behavior. Little things that didn't add up. She'd been distant lately, texting more than usual, always making excuses to be somewhere else when I had free time. She'd get defensive if I asked her about her day. Her phone always turned face down when we sat together, and she seemed irritated by my presence in a way that didn't quite make sense. But I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe it was just the stress of work and the daily grind. I dismissed these small shifts because I didn't want to believe the alternative. She was still my wife, the woman I married, and I was convinced that we'd just fallen into a routine. Nothing more. But then came the day of the trip. I had planned this romantic getaway at a 5-star hotel, a weekend where we could reconnect, unwind, and enjoy each other's company without the distractions of daily life. I made the reservations weeks in advance, worked out all the details, and had everything set up perfectly. I picked her up early from work, even managed to convince her to pack a bag without revealing the destination. She seemed excited, if not a little distracted, but I chalked it up to pre-trip nerves. When we arrived at the hotel, I thought everything was perfect. The luxury of the place, the elegance of the lobby. It was just what we needed. We checked in, went to our room, and as I set our bags down, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe this would be the weekend that brought us back together. But little did I know, as Sarah slipped into the bathroom to freshen up before dinner, that this was the moment my entire world would come crashing down. The elevator ride down to the restaurant started as a normal part of our routine. We were alone in the elevator, Sarah fiddling with her phone, and I couldn't help but feel this sense of anticipation in the air. But just as the elevator doors were about to close, I heard the sound of someone rushing toward us. Without warning, the doors opened again, and in walked someone I recognized, someone I shouldn't have seen at all. It was Tom, a man I'd never liked, but had never openly distrusted. He was a close friend of Sarah's, someone she'd often spoken about in passing. He was a charming guy, successful, the kind of guy who exuded confidence. He and Sarah had been working on a few projects together, but I never thought much of it. Now here he was standing in the elevator with us. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. Nothing more than an awkward but benign situation. But the look that passed between Tom and Sarah, the way she tensed up the second he stepped in, told me everything I needed to know. For a brief moment, I couldn't even speak. The silence was deafening. It wasn't just the awkwardness of the situation. It was the realization that something was off. Tom looked at me with a small, almost dismissive grin as if he knew something I didn't. Sarah, on the other hand, acted like it was just a normal encounter. She smiled at Tom and made some small talk, pretending like everything was fine, like this was all part of some innocent coincidence. But the air felt thick, charged with something unspoken. I felt my stomach churn with the sinking feeling that something was terribly wrong, something I was missing. The elevator doors opened, and we all stepped out, but my mind was racing. What were they doing together here at this moment on this weekend I had so carefully planned for us? I tried to ignore the unease that had settled in the pit of my stomach. I thought maybe I was overreacting, maybe I was just imagining things. But the more I tried to brush it off, the more I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I was about to find out something that would change everything. I tried to focus on the evening ahead, to act like nothing was wrong, but the sense of dread had already begun to sink into me. And I was right. What I was about to face in the coming minutes would tear everything apart. The evening had started out beautifully. The hotel restaurant was elegant, the lighting soft and warm, casting gentle shadows that should have made the night feel romantic. Sarah was still acting distant, but I convinced myself that it was just the usual pre-trip anxiety. She sipped her wine, smiled occasionally, and seemed content enough. Tom's sudden appearance in the elevator was still eating at me, but I tried not to let it show. We had a nice dinner, and I thought maybe I was being paranoid, imagining something out of nothing. Maybe I was just overthinking the situation. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right, and as the evening wore on, that feeling only grew stronger. After dinner, we made our way to the lounge, where soft music played in the background, and the quiet hum of conversations filled the air. I could tell Sarah was still distracted, her phone in her hand more often than not, her eyes scanning the screen even when she was supposed to be engaging in conversation with me. It was frustrating. We used to talk for hours on end, but now I couldn't even hold her attention for more than a few minutes. It was the kind of behavior I had grown used to over the last few months, but tonight, with the nagging feeling in the back of my mind, it felt unbearable. I couldn't pretend anymore. I had to confront her, to ask what was going on. We walked back to the elevator, and as the doors slid open, I was hit with the realization that we weren't alone. There, standing inside, was Tom again. This time, it wasn't just the awkward glance. This time, there was something else. He was standing too close to Sarah, laughing a little too loudly, his hand on her shoulder in a way that was far too familiar for my liking. I could see the way her posture changed, her shoulders tensing when he leaned in. It wasn't something I could ignore anymore. She looked at me briefly, almost apologetically, but quickly turned her attention back to him, as if this moment wasn't happening, as if this wasn't incredibly uncomfortable for me. The elevator ride was only a few seconds long, but in those few seconds I could feel my entire world shift. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew enough to see the signs. This wasn't just a coincidence. This wasn't just a friendly encounter. The way they interacted with each other, those small touches, the way Sarah's body language was open to him told me everything I needed to know. I was about to lose my composure. I was about to demand answers, but before I could get a word out, the elevator doors opened again. Tom walked out first, with Sarah following behind him. She didn't look at me as we exited, and I could feel the distance between us widening, that invisible barrier growing thicker. I wanted to speak. I wanted to demand answers right then and there. But I couldn't. My mind was racing, my heart pounding in my chest as the weight of what I had seen crushed down on me. How had this happened? How had I let things get so bad without even realizing it? And worse, how had I not seen the signs sooner? I had seen the changes in Sarah. I had seen the way she would withdraw from me, how she would hide things, how she seemed distant and cold at times, but I always told myself it was temporary, that it was just stress or work or whatever excuses I could muster. I had let her drift away without ever truly confronting it. But now, with Tom standing there, a little too comfortable in her space, a little too close, everything became clear. She had checked out of our marriage long before I had even known it. She was no longer mine, and I had been the last person to know. That night, as I lay awake, I couldn't stop thinking about everything. The drawing, the elevator ride, the look on Sarah's face when I asked her about Tom. I was drowning in the painful realization that I had been living a lie. The worst part was knowing that I wasn't just betrayed by Sarah. I was betrayed by my own ignorance, by my own unwillingness to see the truth even when it was staring me in the face. I had ignored the little signs, convinced myself everything was fine, and now here I was, standing on the edge of a reality I wasn't ready for. But what could I do? What could I say? The truth was undeniable now, and no matter how much I wanted to deny it, I knew that the life I had with Sarah, the life I thought I had, was over. I didn't sleep at all that night. Lying in bed next to Sarah, my mind was a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and disbelief. The way Tom had been so comfortable with her, how she had allowed it without hesitation, made my skin crawl. It wasn't the first time I had questioned their relationship, but now, with everything I had seen and felt, it felt like the curtain had been pulled back to reveal a truth that had been lurking for far too long. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. The truth had been staring me in the face all night, and no matter how hard I tried to push it away, I knew I needed to confront her. I needed answers. It wasn't a question of if I had to do it. I couldn't keep pretending. The morning came with a forced silence. Sarah was still in her usual routine, getting ready for breakfast, acting like nothing had changed, as if everything was normal. She was talking about plans for the day, as though I hadn't spent the entire night spiraling in my head, as though I hadn't seen her interact with Tom the way she had. The small talk felt suffocating. I couldn't let her continue like this, couldn't let this hang over us any longer. I had to ask. I had to know. But as the minutes ticked by, I found myself hesitating, unsure how to start. How do you begin a conversation when you already know the answer, when you already know what you're about to hear will shatter everything? The thought of confronting her made my stomach churn, but I knew it was necessary. I needed to stop guessing. I needed to hear the truth from her. Finally, as we sat across from each other at the breakfast table, I couldn't take it anymore. I looked at her, feeling the weight of everything that had been building inside me, and I asked her the question that had been haunting me all night. What's going on between you and Tom? I tried to keep my voice steady, but it came out sharp, laced with frustration and hurt. The second the words left my mouth, I saw her face change, just for a split second, but it was enough. Her eyes widened, and for the briefest moment, I could see the panic behind her otherwise calm exterior. It wasn't the reaction of someone who was innocent, of someone who had nothing to hide. It was the reaction of someone caught off guard, caught in a lie. She quickly regained control, masking her discomfort with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. What do you mean? She asked, acting confused, trying to brush off the question like it was nothing. But I could tell she was rattled. I knew her well enough by now to recognize when she was trying to deflect. This wasn't a moment of confusion. It was a moment of guilt, and she knew it. My chest tightened as I pressed her, asking again, but this time, more directly, "You've been seeing him, haven't you? What's really going on, Sarah?" The words tasted bitter, coming out as though I was speaking a language I wasn't familiar with. The realization was too fresh, too raw. But I needed to hear it. I needed to hear her admit it. She paused. A long pause. It was enough to make the silence between us unbearable. I watched her shift in her seat, the nervousness creeping into her posture. Then, with a deep breath, she let out a half-laugh, like it was all a big misunderstanding, like she was the one being accused of something absurd. "You're just being paranoid," she said, her voice dripping with a mix of defensiveness and condescension. "Tom and I are just friends, Greg. We're just colleagues. I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of this." But there was something about the way she said it, something forced, something that didn't feel genuine. Her words felt hollow, like a rehearsed line, like she was trying too hard to convince me. I knew better. I felt a cold rage building in my chest as I looked at her, seeing her attempt to dismiss me as if this wasn't something that had shattered my entire reality. The man she was so adamant about protecting, the man she claimed was just a friend, had been standing so close to her in that elevator, touching her, laughing with her in a way that no friend ever should. I couldn't ignore the way she looked at him, the way she didn't look at me. "You're lying," I told her, and my voice was low, barely controlled. "You've been lying to me for months, haven't you?" That was when the walls came crashing down. She stopped pretending to be casual, stopped playing the role of the innocent wife. The smile faded from her face, and in its place I saw irritation. A sudden, sharp change in her demeanor. "Oh, come on, Greg," she snapped. "You're acting like I've done something wrong. This isn't a big deal." Her tone was cold, dismissive, like the entire conversation was something beneath her, something she didn't have time for. But beneath the anger, I could see the cracks. I could see the guilt flashing across her face, no matter how hard she tried to hide it. She wasn't denying it anymore. She wasn't trying to come up with an excuse. She was just angry that I had the audacity to question her, to challenge the version of her life that she had crafted. The conversation spiraled out of control from there. She accused me of being controlling, of never giving her the space she needed, of being too clingy. She told me that I had changed, that I wasn't the same person she had married. That was the moment I realized how deeply she had already detached from me. She was projecting her own guilt onto me, making it seem like this was all my fault, like I was somehow responsible for the distance between us, for the disconnection she had felt for so long. But I wasn't the one who had checked out of the marriage. I wasn't the one who had looked for comfort in someone else's arms. That was all on her. And despite her trying to paint me as the villain, despite her attempts to turn this around, I knew the truth. She was having an affair with Tom, and that was something I couldn't ignore any longer. It was in that moment, standing in the kitchen of the hotel suite, that I realized there was nothing left to save. She wasn't just lying about Tom. She was lying about everything, about her feelings for me, about our marriage, about the life we had built together. And what hurt the most was not just the betrayal itself, but the way she seemed so utterly indifferent to the devastation she had caused. I had spent so long trying to hold us together, trying to keep our relationship afloat, but she had already jumped ship. And now I was left standing on the dock, watching her sail away with someone else. The moment Sarah finally admitted the truth, or at least stopped denying it, a cold silence washed over the room. The words "I've been seeing Tom" hung in the air between us, heavier than anything I had ever heard in my life. It wasn't anger that I felt first. It was a numb disbelief, a hollow shock that left me paralyzed. I had spent the last few months feeling something was off, but nothing had prepared me for the full weight of that admission. There's something about hearing a truth that you've suspected but never wanted to believe that leaves you utterly unmoored. My heart raced, my hands clenched at my sides, but I couldn't find the words. What was there left to say? She had already said everything I needed to know. It wasn't just that she was seeing someone else, it was that she had been seeing him. The entire foundation of our relationship, the trust, the commitment, was gone, and there I stood, staring at the person I thought I knew, but realizing that I didn't know her at all. The next few hours were a blur. We didn't speak much after that, not really. Sarah's words still echoed in my mind, but they didn't seem to reach me the way they should have. I was running on autopilot, trying to process the enormity of what had just been revealed. My mind was like a storm, swirling with conflicting emotions: anger, humiliation, sadness, disbelief, but all of it was muted, like I was watching it all happen from a distance. It felt surreal, like I was stuck in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I couldn't shake the image of her with him, the thought of her giving someone else the love, the attention, the affection that I thought I had built with her. I had been a fool to not see it. I had been a fool to ignore all the small signs, the strange behavior, the secrecy. She had been slipping away for months and I hadn't even noticed. Or maybe I had noticed, but I didn't want to face it. I wanted to scream, to shout, to demand every single answer she had been withholding from me, but instead, I found myself sitting in a cold, sterile hotel room, utterly defeated. This wasn't how I imagined this weekend would go. I had thought we were going to reconnect, that this would be a turning point for us, a chance to rebuild. Instead, I was sitting in the aftermath of something I couldn't undo. I felt stupid. All of my efforts, all of the little things I had done for us, the times I had tried to make her feel loved and appreciated, none of it had mattered. None of it had been enough. She was already gone. The next morning, Sarah was different. The mask was back on. She tried to act normal, tried to pretend like the conversation we'd had didn't just shatter the foundation of our marriage. She moved around the hotel room like it was just another day, like the events of the night before weren't the end of everything I had known. I could feel the distance between us, but it wasn't the same distance I had felt before, the cold silence, the subtle withdrawal from me. Now it was something different. It was a chasm, a complete breakdown of everything that had once held us together. I could feel her trying to maintain control of the situation, trying to act like everything was okay, like we could go back to how things had been. But we couldn't. I couldn't. I was already too far gone. Every interaction, every glance between us after that moment felt heavy with the weight of what had been revealed. It wasn't just the affair. It was the way she had dismissed me, the way she had treated me as if I was the one who was overreacting, who was the one at fault. The guilt, the shame, it was all on me in her eyes. I was the one who wasn't meeting her needs. I was the one who had failed her, as if the affair was some logical result of my shortcomings. I had been nothing but patient, loving, and supportive. I had sacrificed pieces of myself for her and for us, and yet she had gone behind my back, betraying everything I thought we were. And somehow, she had the audacity to make it seem like it was my fault. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to rage against the unfairness of it all, to scream at her for the pain she had caused me. But instead, there was a suffocating sadness that engulfed me. There was nothing left to fight for. I had fought for her attention, her affection, for her to come back to me, but I was fighting a battle that had already been lost. My mind kept racing back to the small moments, the way she had looked at me, the way she had touched Tom so casually in that elevator, the way she couldn't even look me in the eye during our conversation. I felt like I had been living in a house of mirrors, looking at a version of her that wasn't real, a version that didn't exist. The person I thought I had married, the person I had trusted with everything, was gone. The emotional toll was unbearable. It wasn't just the affair itself. It was everything that led up to it, everything I had ignored, everything that I had let slide. How many times had I asked her about Tom and gotten some vague answer, some brush off that made me feel like I was being unreasonable? How many times had I questioned her behavior, only to be met with irritation or silence? How many times had I excused her distance, her emotional withdrawal, because I didn't want to admit that something was wrong? I had been too blinded by my love for her, too consumed by the idea of our perfect life, to see the cracks. And now, those cracks had become a full fracture, a gaping wound that couldn't be healed. I spent the next few days in a haze. I couldn't think straight, couldn't focus on anything other than the overwhelming sadness that had taken over every corner of my mind. I wanted to pretend that things could go back to normal, that this weekend was just a blip on the radar, but I knew deep down that it wasn't. There was no going back from this. The truth was out, and once it was out, there was no unknowing it. The lies were exposed, and no matter how much Sarah tried to apologize or explain, I couldn't erase the image of her with Tom, couldn't forget the betrayal that had been hidden in plain sight. I wanted to be strong, to hold it together for myself, for Jack, but it felt impossible. I was drowning, suffocating in the pain of it all. The weight of the betrayal was too much, and I couldn't see how to move forward from here. The days following the confrontation felt like they stretched on forever, each one heavier than the last. Every moment I spent in that hotel room felt like a continuation of the same sickening nightmare. I had always believed that if something like this ever happened, I would have the strength to confront it head-on and take decisive action. But now, all I felt was numbness, a sense of hopelessness that wrapped itself around me like a thick fog. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything, wondering how it had all come to this. I had always thought of my life with Sarah as something solid, something dependable, but in a matter of hours that security had been stripped away. I couldn't escape the fact that my wife, the woman I had trusted with everything, had chosen someone else over me. The weight of that reality pressed down on me more with each passing day. But even amidst the sadness, I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep living in this state of uncertainty. I couldn't keep pretending that things were okay when everything had already fallen apart. The hardest part was making the decision about what came next. I had spent so much time asking myself whether this was something that could be salvaged, whether our marriage was worth saving, but each time I asked, the answer became more and more obvious. No, it wasn't worth saving. Sarah had checked out long before I had ever realized it, and no amount of counseling or late-night conversations would change that. The hurt ran too deep, the trust too shattered, and the love that I had felt for her felt like a distant memory, a version of her that no longer existed. I was left with nothing but the hollow shell of a marriage that had long since lost its meaning. As much as I had wanted to avoid this, as much as I had tried to deny it, the truth was clear. I had to let go. Letting go wasn't easy, though. The emotional toll it took on me was immense. There were moments when I wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all, to rage against the woman who had betrayed me, to demand answers that I knew I'd never get. But in the end, I realized that holding on to the anger, the hurt, was only going to destroy me. If I wanted to move forward, if I wanted to have any chance of healing, I needed to release it. I needed to release her. The first step was the hardest. I knew I had to ask Sarah to leave. I couldn't keep living in that hotel room, pretending that things could go back to the way they were. I couldn't even look at her without feeling that sharp, sickening pain that coursed through me at the thought of everything she had done. I'd given her the benefit of the doubt for so long, excusing the late nights, the distance, the secrecy, but the reality had finally caught up with me. She wasn't the woman I thought she was, and I wasn't the man I used to be either. I had spent so much of myself trying to make this marriage work, so much of myself in service of something that no longer existed. I wasn't just losing her. I was losing the version of me that had spent years believing in something that had been built on lies. I called a lawyer. It was a surreal feeling, dialing the number, hearing myself say the words out loud. I want to file for divorce. I had always imagined a different kind of life, a different kind of future. But this wasn't the future I had planned. I wasn't going to waste any more time clinging to something that had already slipped away. And as much as it hurt, as much as it felt like a part of me was dying inside, I knew this was the right decision. I knew that if I didn't make a clean break, if I didn't take control of the situation, I would be stuck in this painful limbo forever. The process was cold, clinical. The papers were drawn up, the financials were laid out, and the decision was made. It was final. Sarah didn't put up a fight, not in any meaningful way. She didn't beg. She didn't plead. She didn't apologize. She just accepted it like she had been waiting for me to reach this point. I could see the relief in her eyes. She wasn't the woman I had married anymore. And maybe she hadn't been for a long time, but I had been too blind to see it. I was the last to know. After I made the decision, it didn't feel like an immediate weight was lifted. It wasn't some triumphant moment of freedom. There was no sense of liberation, no immediate joy in making the decision. There was just exhaustion. The pain didn't go away. The sadness didn't disappear. But what did change was the sense of agency, the sense that I was taking back control of my life. I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to let this be the thing that ruined everything I had worked for, everything I had ever dreamed of. It would take time, but eventually, I knew I would be okay. There would be moments of grief, moments when the hurt would creep back in, but I had made the choice to walk away, and that was the first step toward healing. There was still so much left to figure out. The logistics of the divorce, the conversations I'd have to have with Jack when he was old enough to understand. Those things hung over me like an impending storm. But one thing became clear. My future was mine to create. And as painful as this process was, I knew it was the only way forward. I would heal. I would rebuild. I would be okay. Through all of this, I've learned that you can't force someone to love you. You can't make them stay if they don't want to. And most importantly, I've learned that sometimes, the best thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from something that's already broken. No matter how much you want to fix it. No matter how much you wish it could be different. It wasn't about winning the marriage or about being right. It was about choosing myself, choosing my peace of mind, and choosing the life I still had ahead of me. If there's anything I've learned through this process, it's that the hardest part is often just admitting that it's over, but once you do, once you accept it, the weight begins to lift. You start to see the possibility of a new beginning. And even though it might be terrifying at first, I know now that it's the only way forward. There's life after betrayal. And I'm going to find it. It's been several months since everything came crashing down. And I still can't believe I'm here, writing about the end of my marriage. The pain is still there, of course, but it's different now. It's not the sharp, paralyzing hurt that I felt in the immediate aftermath of the betrayal. Instead, it's a dull ache that lingers in the background, a constant reminder of what I've lost. There are still moments when I'm hit with waves of sadness, times when I find myself thinking about Sarah and wondering how she's doing. But I'm learning to live with it, to accept that my life has changed in ways I didn't expect, but that it can still be meaningful. The truth is, I'm still figuring out who I am outside of the context of my marriage. I'm still learning how to be the person I was before I was her husband, before I was consumed by the day-to-day of a relationship that had long since been broken. But I'm making progress. One of the hardest things about divorce is the way it forces you to confront who you've been, who you've become, and what you've been willing to tolerate. I spent so much of my marriage convincing myself that things were fine, that we were fine, when in reality, I was holding on to a relationship that no longer existed. The hardest pill to swallow has been the realization that I wasn't just betrayed by Sarah. I betrayed myself. I allowed myself to stay in something that wasn't healthy, something that had long since ceased to bring me happiness. I let my own sense of duty to her, to our family, blind me to the cracks that were widening every day. I let my pride, my love for her, keep me from acknowledging that the woman I had loved no longer existed. The guilt I've carried for not seeing the truth sooner has been overwhelming, but I'm learning to forgive myself. I didn't know what I didn't know. I thought that by loving her, by being there for her, I could fix things, but the truth was, I couldn't fix her. I couldn't fix a relationship that she had already checked out of. And the biggest lesson I've learned through all of this is that love, no matter how strong, can't make someone stay if they don't want to. The hardest part has been the toll it's taken on Jack. I've tried to keep things as normal as possible for him. He's too young to understand the intricacies of the situation, but he knows that things are different. He's asked about his mother, and I've had to find a way to explain why she isn't around as much, why she isn't living with us anymore. I never wanted to have these conversations with him. I never wanted him to feel the weight of what happened, but I also wanted him to understand that no matter what happened between his mother and me, he was loved, and that he was safe. It's been a challenge, but I'm doing my best to be the father he deserves, to show him that even in the face of something as painful as this, life still moves forward. I want him to grow up knowing that it's okay to feel hurt, it's okay to feel lost, but it's also okay to pick yourself up and keep going. It's not easy, but I'm committed to giving him the stability and love that he needs. As for Sarah, I haven't heard from her much since the divorce proceedings began. I don't know where she is, I don't know who she's with, and I honestly don't care anymore. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I married, is gone, and I've accepted that. She's no longer a part of my life, and I've stopped wishing that things could be different. I've stopped hoping for some grand apology or some emotional breakthrough where she finally understands the damage she caused. The truth is, she probably won't ever fully grasp it, and I've come to terms with that. I don't need closure from her. I don't need her to validate my feelings. The closure I found has come from within. I've realized that my worth isn't defined by someone else's actions. My worth isn't tied to Sarah, to her love, to her betrayal. It's mine, and I get to decide how to rebuild my life from here. In the end, I've learned more about myself than I ever could have imagined. I've learned that sometimes the hardest thing you can do is let go. I've learned that while love is important, it's not the only thing that holds a relationship together. Trust, respect, and mutual effort are just as essential, and when those things are broken, no amount of love can fix it. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought, that even in the face of something as devastating as betrayal, I can find my way back to happiness. It's a long road, and I'm still on it, but I can see the light ahead. I'm not the same person I was when all of this started. I'm wiser, I'm stronger, and I'm more determined to create a life that reflects who I truly am. I'm no longer living for someone else's approval. I'm living for me. To anyone going through something similar, I would say this: don't wait. Don't wait for things to get better on their own. Don't wait for someone to change or for someone to come to their senses. If you're in a relationship where the trust is broken, where the love has faded, and where you're constantly doubting your worth, let go. It may feel impossible, it may feel like the hardest thing you'll ever do, but it's the only way to truly heal. You deserve more than what's been given to you. You deserve honesty, respect, and love that's reciprocated. Don't settle for less. Your future is in your hands, and it's up to you to shape it into something better. For me, I'm moving forward, one day at a time, but I'm moving forward. I'm ready for whatever comes next. And whatever that is, I know I'll be okay. We'll be okay.